Hey everybody, this right here is the monthly segment on forgotten games. If you are new to the channel, welcome. If you are a subscriber, welcome back. This month's title is Faxanadu for the NES. Let's get started. What happens when you take a bit of Castlevania, some Zelda 2, and then add a dash of RPG salt to it all? And you get Faxanadu, a surprising NES title that somehow ends up taking all those things and makes it work. I first heard about this title back in Nintendo Power number 7. It looked interesting. Now, for those of you out there that might not be familiar with this title and its history, Faxanadu is actually a spin-off game from the Xanadu games, which actually they themselves are spin-offs from the Dragonslayer game series. And that series spans many games throughout the years. Little bit of trivia here, Legacy of the Wizard on the Nintendo Entertainment System is actually part of the Dragonslayer series and one of the first games ever to incorporate not only an open world Metroidvania style gameplay to an RPG game, but a non-linear mechanic as well. Legacy of the Wizard was actually called Dragonslayer 4 back in Japan. Faxanadu was released in Japan in 1987 and we had to wait almost 2 years before getting it here in the States in 1989. The game was developed by Hudson Soft and it was published here in the States by Nintendo, while in Japan, the game was published by Hudson Soft themselves. Looking back on it now, I wonder why Hudson Soft did not make a Faxanadu game on the PC Engine. They did release Dragonslayer Legend of Heroes on the Turbo CD back in Japan. I'm going to cover that game sometime in the future. Now, back to Faxanadu. The game was an instant classic, not only for myself, but for publications and other gamers out there. It takes place entirely on a 2D playing field, and it plays out like a mixture between a platformer and a role-playing game with a little bit of an open-world mechanics to it. You are an adventurer who returns home only to find out that his kingdom is almost abandoned and in disarray. After talking to the king on the town of Aeolus, you find out that the waters that were used to sustain the kingdom have stopped running. Whatever is left of that water has been poisoned. The king informs you that the dwarves are behind all of this, and he puts 1,500 gold pieces in your hand, and he tasks you with getting to the bottom of this. No pressure, right? Now, along the way, you're gonna have to fend off lots of enemies, some of which resemble aliens, but it all makes sense when you read the story and you get to the end of the game. And I'm not going to spoil it for you. You start the game off with a dagger which has the worst attack range possible, so get the sword as soon as you can, and by that I mean as soon as you reach the town that sells it. It is not an option early in the game. Weapons are only available when you reach certain towns, and since the sword is located in a town or two after the beginning of the game, you're going to have to grind a lot and make do with that dagger, and that is not an easy task. Get ready to sit back and hack and slash for a while. Once you get your hands on a lot of gold, you head to the next town in the area to spend your hard-earned money. And in the towns you have shops for weapons and armor, keys, meats, as well as a church and a hospital. There are also bars that you can visit to see what the local folks have to say. Some of it can be helpful in knowing what to do next. Also, what is with this game and smoking? You meet this guy at the beginning and you think to yourself, well, maybe the programmers just forgot to remove him before shipping the game. It happens, right? No big deal. And then you see this, and this, and this.
The following segment was brought to you by Laramie Cigarettes, the cool way to let your mouth party.
The hospital is vital in that it is one of two ways to regain your magic. The only other way to regain magic is through taking an elixir, and those are very rare, and if you do find one in a shop, get ready to put out a mortgage on that bottle. They are expensive. As for health, you can go to a hospital or just remember which enemies drop bread. That's gonna replenish some of your health. And just like with gold, you will have to grind for that bread. But it is much better than paying that physician to heal you. I would say the only reason to go to a hospital is if you need magic. There are also items that give you a slight temporary boost to your stats, like the glove here. It raises your attack power, but it only lasts for about maybe 30 seconds. And the ointment is another item that is great, but lasts a short time. It's basically like the star power-up of Faxanadu, but there's no music or any graphical changes to you to give you an idea of how long it lasts. So once you pick up the ointment, start counting. One cool little detail that I like about this game is that you can see your character's look change when you pick up a new weapon, shield, or armor. And usually games from that time didn't do that. I always like games that take the time to show those little details. Another big thing that you will be collecting in this game is not only weapons, but magic. There are various types of magic and you can only purchase them in the weapon shop. This is where you have to be a little cautious and use magic accordingly. By that I mean is that you can't just go around crazy and just use your magic right away on every single enemy that you see, because there are only two ways to replenish that magic, like I stated before, the hospital or elixir. However, the magic that you collect gives you the ability to shoot projectiles, which comes in very handy when you have enemies that you might want to stay away from, or are in a location where it's easier for you just to shoot them without having to take any hits. The levels are very large and spacious, and you're going to be going back and forth between the town and some of the dungeons / towers as you collect money and experience points. One of the things that is really tricky with the game is the controls. Your character has a specific way of walking where he starts off slow before gaining momentum and speeding up. Now this right here is a very tricky control mechanic to get used to, specifically when you get to areas that you're going to be doing a lot of platforming. Some of those areas are very tricky because you have to time that jump just right. If you're just a little bit off, you're going to fall down and you have to start all over from whatever it is that you're trying to do. And that can get a little bit irritating after a while. The graphics, while not amazing, are not bad. The colors seemed a little bit muted and maybe stuck on that specific palette of yellow and brown, but occasionally you will see a good amount of colors on screen when you go into dungeons or the towns. Nothing amazing, but you have to remember that the title was a very early release for the Nintendo library. When you take that into consideration, this game is an above average looking title. There's also what I feel to be a good variety of enemies on every level. Sure, you're going to see some of them time and time again, but overall is quite vast for an early NES game. The music I found to be outstanding. The tunes fit the theme of the game and the pacing of it perfectly. You can go from moody sounds when walking into a chapel to a somewhat more upbeat title when you're traversing the regular world. None of the music here feels like it's out of place, and that's something very hard to do when you're talking about a time when soundtracks were very limited due to technology and the amount of space on cartridges. That's why I feel that Faxanadu is one of those NES games that usually gets overlooked when we are talking about great soundtracks on an 8-bit game. This is one of those soundtracks that just stays with you for years after you play the game. So why is this game part of my Forgotten series? Well, even though Dragonslayer the series continued to make games way after this one, this title specifically never got a proper sequel. I remember when I saw pictures of ActRaiser and I thought to myself, oh, now here's a sequel to Faxanadu on the Super Nintendo and I can't wait to play it. Unfortunately, it was not a sequel, obviously, although ActRaiser on its own, it's an amazing game. Again, after all these years, I am still shocked that Hudson Soft never released a sequel or a remake of any type on the TurboGrafx 16 or PC Engine. But seeing how so many companies nowadays are doing retro titles, I would not be surprised if somebody revisited this game, or maybe even after all these years, created a sequel to it. I hope so, because it's a great game. Hope you enjoyed this little flashback on a great title and maybe learned a little something along the way. Stay tuned and be back here in about 10 days or so for my next video. Keep watching, keep playing, and as always, Take care of yourselves.